Hey there, students. How are things? Well, I did get out of Dubai and Hong Kong on my way home. All right. So we've gotten to that spot that everyone wants to get to. We've gotten to that spot that you've all been waiting for. Your favorite medium, my favorite medium. The internet. Yes, yes, the internet. So follow along with me today. Make sure that you are taking notes as we go. Like I said, I might go a little bit faster than it's possible for you to take notes. If you need to, pause it, rewind a little bit, do things like that. So anyway, let's take a look at the history of the internet. So, internet history. What are we talking about here? Well, one interesting thing about the internet, as compared to the most recent mediums, which had been TV and radio, or radio and TV, more like, is that the internet was wired. It was hardwired in. The technology of sending through things through the air, radio signals and TV signals and the like, was quite revolutionary at the time. It's interesting that internet kind of went back a step. So internet was more like the phone or the telegraph rather than the radio or the TV, and the idea that it was hardwired in. Uh, and it's changed a little bit since its inception. I mean, we have plenty of airbound internet at this point, but for a long time, as the internet started up, it was all hardwired in. I think before we dig into exactly how the internet was made, we need to understand how computer language works. So, computer language, binary. Have you ever heard of binary? It's the zeros and ones. Binary language is how a computer talks. It's the universal computer language. Some people can read binary real well. Like my brother could sit down with a page of zeros and ones and go, like, what? I don't get it. I don't get it. But anyway, binary, here's a little interesting side note for you. Binary came from a cotton loom. So they had these cotton loom machines that were making, I don't know, sweaters and things like that. And so in this frame that they would put onto a loom, it would have different sized holes, small or large, and those different sized holes would let the machine know what color yarn to put in and out of these binary cotton looms. And so these cards that were used with holes of varying shapes ultimately became the first computer programming gear, because even when my father was in college, which was fairly late, we're talking into late 60s, early 70s, they still use these cards to program computers. And so the binary language we have for computers was originally based uh, on cotton looms. Uh, and apparently, when you're making a program or an app with these cards that you'd feed into computers, you had to keep them all the same way, and you had to keep them all in the same order. If you were to screw up the order or the direction of them, it would screw up your program because you'd be telling the computer something different. So interesting how things work. So the internet. Now that we know how a computer talks through binary language, we have to understand what the goal of the internet was. The goal of the internet is to get two computers in separate locations to be able to speak with one another and access each other's files. That is the essence of the internet. So the internet started as a project. It was a military project. Once again, every medium has come out of a situation where there's lots of manpower and lots of money. ARPANET, which is the first version of the internet, came from the US military. We had lots of money involved. We had lots of people involved. So ARPANET, what did it stand for? ARPANET stands for Advanced Research Projects Agency Network. So you can still see the net in there as in internet. That was still a thing, or originally was a thing. So ARPANET was created as a military program, and that was headed by a guy named Licklider in 1963. So quite a long time before I was even born. And the idea that they wanted to figure out is how to get two computers to do packet switching. What do I mean by packet switching? Essentially taking a chunk of data from one computer and transferring it and having it be able to be read by another computer. In order to packet switch, we had to get to computers to figure out how to talk to one another. And so one necessary part in ARPANET's research happened prior to 63, and that is in 1958, the modem was invented. You all probably have a modem. Maybe you don't know what it is, but okay, so maybe when the internet goes out and you can't figure out why the internet's out at your house, it's the thing you plug and unplug. There you go. Maybe you got it now. What a modem is, it stands for modulator, demodulator, essentially coder and decoder. So the idea is the language gets put into it from your computer and translated out into another computer. So the modem was made in 1958, and that helped ARPANET become a thing. Why was the internet invented? Because much of the world at the time was all suffering from the same fear, this fear of nuclear weapons. So if you look at it, 63, 45 is when the first bomb was dropped. So what are we talking, like 15, 18 years after the first bomb was dropped? Now we started getting other countries that started developing the bomb, namely Russia. And here was the scare. That if Russia were to drop a nuclear bomb anywhere across the continental United States, that they could potentially knock out communication, that one side of America couldn't speak to the other side of America. And so they wanted a way that, hey, even if a bomb were dropped and all the radio towers were knocked out, all the TV towers were knocked out, even all of the telephone wires were knocked out, like, is there a way that we could communicate to one another? And specifically, they wanted to communicate all the way across the United States. And so what happened is, ARPANET's goal originally was to have communications between Berkeley College, which is in Oakland, California, and MIT, which is in the Boston area in Massachusetts. So all the way across the country. Is there a way that we could communicate if all the towers had got brought down by a nuclear attack? And so this was the inspiration for the internet. Can my computer on this coast talk to your computer on that coast? Can we share information from side to side in case of a disaster? So ARPANET was a military-based project for a long time, starting in 63, and it stayed that way for a long time. No one saw the light of day as far as any internet. And something happened in the 80s. In the 80s, the internet started becoming available to colleges. So if you were involved at a college, you got a very early version of the internet, which was mainly used to share documents from one college to another college, back and forth. A network amongst colleges was set up. But the public still didn't have use of the internet. It was merely a college-based research thing, and the research added to the ARPANET and to the military's understanding of the internet. Now, eventually, all great things must come to an end. ARPANET was decommissioned by the military, by the U.S. military in 1990. When something's decommissioned, they're no longer using it. It's no longer top secret. It gets opened up. So what brought the internet to the public, and when did it actually come to the public? There was a law. Once again, a law comes through, and the law was called the High Performance Computing Act of 1991. The High Performance Computing Act of 1991 finally made the internet public. I was lucky enough to have access to the internet in 1991 because of the work that my father was involved in at the college that he was at. And I recall the internet, and I recall my dad saying that this is going to change the world. But what I also remember is how tragically boring It was. It was nothing but text. There were no pictures or anything or videos or anything like that on there at the time. In fact, I looked it up when I had access to the internet back then. There were 80 websites. That's it. 80. You could probably surf the entirety of them in a day. Or if you had the internet speed that we do now, you could probably surf the entirety of them in just over a couple minutes. But um, it was right after we got the internet in 1991 that we moved up to Alaska. And I noticed you weren't allowed to have internet in Alaska because the internet didn't exist in Alaska at the time. So, um, but just out of sheer curiosity, 80 websites then, here we are 30 years later. Want to know how many websites there are now? 1,700,000,000 websites. That's almost a website for every 3 people on the world. I think it's catching on. I think it might be catching on. So that is how us, the public, got the internet. There have been a lot of things along the way that have changed. We used to have dial-up internet, and that would take so long to load one web page, or so long. I remember when music finally came on in like the late 90s, that you would literally bring a book with you to keep yourself busy while you waited for the web page to load. That took tragically long. But even as I graduated high school, it was quite slow. It took something in the early 2000s to actually get the internet usable. I remember someone telling me at one point as I was graduating high school in 1999 that one day we'd be able to watch movies on the internet. I laughed. I laughed because the current speed of the internet was so tragically slow. I didn't ever envision a future where we could watch an entire movie on the internet. Now, look at Netflix, Hulu, all that stuff. And what did it take? In 2001, we went from dial-up internet to high-speed internet. So internet that was based on the telephone now became cable-based internet. And that drastically changed the game. We were talking internet speeds at least 10 times faster than prior. It made the internet actually usable, or time effective, I guess, to use would probably be another way to say it. So what are some other things that got us to our current place of where we are with the internet today? Wi-Fi. Oh, Wi-Fi. Imagine if we didn't have Wi-Fi now. Like, for instance, in this classroom or in the other classroom of ninth graders, we're talking like 30 plus kids would have to be hardwired into a computer. Can you imagine all the lines, all the cables traveling from all of your desks? And if somebody tried to get up to use to get a like a tissue or something and tripping over a few of those wires, like it would be nearly impossible. So Wi-Fi, I recall when McDonald's first put in Wi-Fi across the country in 2008, and I remember thinking, are you saying I could go anywhere across the country and have access to the internet through McDonald's Wi-Fi? All I'd have to do is stop at McDonald's and tap into their internet. So Wi-Fi was a complete game changer. Look at us now. I'm hooked up to the internet on my laptop. That's how I'm talking to you out here in Hong Kong. Cell phones, think about the mobility of our iPads. Like Wi-Fi was a complete game changer. So now we had internet that was fast enough. Now we got unplugged from the wall and we're able to walk around a little bit. And it's a big coup de grace. Smartphones, the idea that you could go from this huge computer. I'll tell you what, like when my dad was in college, the computers that they had took up an entire room. They had to air condition the room, and it got so cold that they had to wear coats into the room. That we could go from a room-sized computer down to a computer that's this big and this tall and this wide, down to a little cell phone that you hold in your pocket. that has all the computing power, if not more than anything. Oh, it does definitely have more computing power than anything that I had when I was a kid. The idea that we could go from that big thing down to that smaller thing. And as I mentioned earlier, that we could go anywhere across the nation, even into some of the more rural areas, and still have access to anything on the internet is a game changer, and has revolutionized things. So look at how far we've come in 30 years. That's all it's been. 30 years, 1991, from dial-up internet and public access to the internet to high-speed internet to having Wi-Fi to having internet anywhere. We are still in the early years of the internet. Compare that 30 years to the 120 years or so of radio, to the, doing math in my head, 80 or so years of TV. So it's still a fairly new thing. And I've argued that we have yet to quite figure it out, and how to use it as effectively as possible. We definitely use it, but maybe not the best ways. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed that rendition of your favorite internet and how it was built and all that. So this is my last day on the internet. This is my last day in Hong Kong. So I will be returning tomorrow. Go over go over those vocab words, and be ready. We'll see you.